there are millions of steps, or at least a dozen steps, between the iron ore and the Ford F-150. Just like there are a whole bunch of value-added processes that happen between your bushel of soybeans and the food at the Kroger store.
The AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. I'm your host, Monte Bottens. Join me as leaders in soil health, research, and ag tech share their perspectives and enable you to farm outside the box. Well, welcome everyone to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. Today I'm joined by Damian Mason. I first met Damian many moons ago. I think it was probably 15 years ago or so. He had a great speaking opportunity, and I remember I bought one of your bumper stickers, Damian, and it's on my Jeep, and it says agriculture because starvation sucks. So I think that's a good place to start today. Welcome, Damian. Glad you could be here.
Thanks for having me. I do remember you being at an event, and I was actually going to ask you when we got going here that I knew it was more than a decade. It's not like you and I see each other all the time or hang out, but I feel like I know you. And then we obviously see each other on social media. Ag's a small sorority, as we all know. And that's good and bad. I mean, that means you've got a network and you've got people that you know, and you can be known, which is important, I guess, for doing what I do. Obviously, I sell commentary and speeches and my podcast and whatever. I came up with that agriculture because starvation sucks. I've always been an ag guy. I've been a real straight shooter my whole career. And it was the time when it was kind of getting to where, social media was sort of really more new, like call it 15 or so years ago, as you said. When you started realizing then that these groups that were using whatever it is, shock social media, do you know that, and people like Michael Pollan, the food activist, and it was a same shit all the time, Monty. Like, we're going to go on social media and we're going to put out there that farmers put 1 million pounds of pesticides on a potato crop and you eat it and all this kind of stuff. And so I went through this whole thing about, we don't do this in agriculture because we've got some nefarious, notion to try and poison humanity. We do this because we're out here, trying to produce stuff.
You mean we're not all out here evil? I mean, come on.
Yeah, right. It's not well. So I was like on my hike. I do a lot of hiking and whatnot with my dogs, either at the farm in Indiana or here in Arizona where I live during the winter. And I was thinking, agriculture's not got everything right. And so I'm the first one to say, hey, we got some problems here. And I do all that. But I'm like, you know what? It's not natural. I went through that whole thing of, nothing about agriculture is natural, Monty. And finally, I was walking down a mountain. I'm like, you know what? Starvation sucks. So you know what? That would be a really bad thing. So are we getting everything right? We sure as hell are not getting everything right in this industry. But look at the alternative. And that's how I came up with that. And I stuck it on a sticker, stuck it on T-shirts. And of course, back then I worked with an agency who's kind of a spineless wonder. And he said, oh, I don't think I'd say something like that. Starvation sucks. Oh, it's going to ignite people. I'm like, well, and I made up another set of T-shirts that said, agriculture because starvation's harmful to your health. I went to an event. I sold 26 T-shirts that said starvation sucks and one that said starvation is harmful to your health. The audience spoke, and there you are. So, yeah.
No, it's quite a journey you've been on, really educating and pointing out areas where, yes, the farmer isn't trying to be nefarious and do these things wrong. But on the other hand, those people, they've got a point. They're trying to make a point. When there's some sort of middle ground, I think you do a great job of trying to communicate that, through comedy and through pointed, remarks that you make to try to bring these two sides together. So tell us the whole story, Damian, how your journey and being there in Indiana and stuff. And plus first off, you can tell this guy is really smart. We're here around Christmas time recording this and he's in Arizona. So yeah, definitely listen to what he says because I'm in Illinois. Right. So anyway, go ahead. Tell us your full story, Damian, about.
Well, I've got the map of Indiana behind me. My wife got that for me several years ago. We do split time between two states. I am in Arizona right now. It's Christmas week. We came out here basically December 1st, and we'll go back to the farm the end of April. It's kind of a funny deal. I'm obviously very active. For those of you that are in the audience are like, who is this guy? 31 and a half years ago, I quit corporate America and launched into comedy. So I raised on a dairy farm in northeastern Indiana, in a town called Huntington. Went to Purdue, degree in agricultural economics, got out in 1992. For those of you that are maybe Monty and I our age, you can remember there wasn't a whole hell of a lot good going on from about 1981 until about sometime in the early 2000s in agriculture. And I'm not being mean, and I'm not pulling I walked uphill in blizzards to school. I'm just telling you, it was a tough time. I did not work in corporate agriculture when I got out of Purdue, despite my degree in agricultural economics. In fact, I thought I would never be in ag. I thought, you know what, the farm upbringing was fine. I remember I met former Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butts on the campus of Purdue at an ag econ event one time, and I shook his hand and said, "You're a farm boy, aren't you?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "Got them calluses." So I'm always been, excited about it, but I didn't think I was going to work in agriculture because it was not a good place to be from the 80s and then the 90s. So I went and sold lighting products. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be a corporate guy. And I was all excited. You're getting flown around to Las Vegas for the home builder show. And I remember eating lobster tail and drinking a 22-ounce Foster's at some restaurant. And like, man, this whole corporate thing's great. And after about a year of that, I'm like, you know what? You don't get really paid on your merit sometimes. You get paid on your ability to politic. And this isn't a very creative business. I'm just out here going to these things and, who can laugh the loudest at the boss's jokes and all that. And it wasn't for me. So I quit my job and became a political comedian in 1994 after I'd won a Halloween costume contest dressed up as Bill Clinton. So the story is I was a Bill Clinton impersonator. The company started using me at trade shows and sales meetings dressed up as Clinton to be like this funny draw at the trade show booth or at these sales meetings. So I'm like, you know what? I don't really dig this whole lighting business anyhow. I'm going to go and venture off into being a political comedian. So it was a very specialized act. I would dress up as Bill Clinton. I did the whole voice. Now, how y'all doing? How'd you like to find out what it means when I say I'm a hands-on politician? Yeah, all that stuff. I did not have. So it was a neat run. I'm very proud. I'm proud of it, Monty, because, and comedy is different now. And then there's a great deal of sensitivity, and everyone uses being offended as a chance to control outcomes or the narrative. And I don't like that. But it was a different time 31 years ago. So I sold the act. I mean, I did clubs and quickly realized that if you want to get paid well, you've got to be in front of corporate type crowds and association type crowds. So you talk about the rubber chicken circuit, man. If there was a state association or a national association, I'd work in DC, 15 times a year, because if you're the National Association of whatever it is, you have your meeting in Washington, D.C. What would be a great topper on the Saturday night awards banquet? Bring in Bill Clinton. So I banged it up for a long time doing political comedy. Things changed after Bill Clinton left office. I still sold the act and was still selling it, maybe like 1/3 as much. I went from doing like 100 gigs a year to 30. But then 9/11 happened and it changed things really promptly. Comedy went out of favor. Political comedy went out of favor. Hell, conventions. People were afraid to get on airplanes after that. So it took a really big setback. And then kind of went about reinventing myself. It took me several years. And then I came up with this probably about 20 years ago, where I became the ag guy. I'm like, well, I know how to be funny, and I know about ag, and I've been raised around it. And that was the genesis of me being sort of the ag funny guy. And then it was a few years into that, I always kept putting in points. And then like about the time you and I were probably met, I had clients who would call up and say, yeah, we want you to be funny. We want you to do your ag humor thing, but we really want you to make sure that you kind of provide a little bit of an outlook on stuff. Can you do that? And I said, well, I read the Wall Street Journal every day that I travel, and I have a degree from a pretty substantial ag university. I could do that. So then it really kind of became the journey of being a bit more the ag outlook guy. And I commonly say things like, you want markets, go check out Vaclavic. You want markets. There are all kinds of people that are into the markets. I don't want to do any of that, but I can talk about marketplace. And living part-time in Arizona, I think really helps with that, because we can get very siloed in this business, Monty. And if all you do is hang around with other people from where you're from in your industry, you get pretty siloed. So I think that traveling around and then also living part of the time around suburbia broadens the perspective.
So what are some of the areas you see today then that are kind of the biggest gaps between a farmer's understanding of the market and a consumer's understanding of the farmer?
So one of the things that I'm going to shoot a video about, and you see my stuff, I put commentary videos out. Plus, I produce the Business of Agriculture show, which comes out every Monday on YouTube, Acres TV, and all the audio platforms. And I try to be, again, very honest. I think that there's plenty of people out here that just are passionate about agriculture, and I just love farming. And I married my high school sweetheart, and we raise our kids on the 5th generation farm, and that's all cute. That's nice. It's wonderful. It tends to also be a lot of ag people preaching about the love of ag to the people of ag. It's a little bit like preaching to the choir. So I give ag folks some of this perspective. And to answer your question, I think it's important. I'm going to shoot a video about this. Actually, it's on my to-do list right here. Agricultural people need to understand you are not your consumer. And this is, this is a really remarkable thing. We are not our consumer. And the other part of that, Monty, I would say, remember that we are in a consumer business. And the average producer doesn't want to think that way. They just love the idea that they go out there and they can be in their combine or, doing their thing and dropping off their grain at the terminal and whatever. But ultimately, if there's no consumer, there's no us. And, let's think about, if you ate today, thank a farmer. Well, if you farmed it today, thank a consumer. And let's be real honest here. If you're farming right now, you might also want to thank the taxpayers, because there's going to be bailouts create more bailouts. And I see more of that happening. So if we understand what we do is fundamental to our existence, absolutely. What we do is fundamental to humanity. There's no question. Every great economy is foundationed on abundant food. I mean, like, without that, you ain't got nothing, right? So that's foundational. There's no question. But we also should understand that we are in a consumer business, and without them, there's no need for us. And they are very different than we are. And there's a lot of positives out there on the consumer front also. But I think the biggest thing is for us to understand that all this thing about telling them they need to thank us, I mean, come on. I tell my ag crowd, huh?
I mean, where did that come from? And I always hear that, and I'm thinking, no. Why? I've always rejected that, thinking, hey, I farm, okay,
Yeah.
and I'm getting paid for what I grow and what I sell to people who are going to consume it. I've just never understood that.
It becomes very
creates this entitlement mentality, and then is it fed into that? Well, we feed the world mantra that we've been sold as farmers, and we've done so good at it that we're driving ourselves into poverty. I mean, what? I mean, where does it come from?
Yeah. So I tell my ag audiences, if I'm in front of a producer ag audiences, and you put this out there, and you can hear a pin drop, because your average farmer audience has been told a lot of stuff, very self-congratulatory. I said, let me just go ahead and throw something out for you. When I was a political comedy act, I did every kind of group, the morticians associations to the construction trade group association. I was in front of I wasn't in front of ag audiences all the time back in my comedy days. I said, but you know what I can tell you? From auto dealers to the morticians associations to the insurance groups, you know what none of them do? None of them have at their convention or at their meeting a Paul Harvey poem where they read "God made a construction worker." I said, you've got to get a hold of yourself here. You pat yourselves in the back about feeding the world. If you ate today, thank a farmer. And so God made a farmer. I'm like, you're giving yourself a hero complex, and I don't think it's healthy. Yes, I'm an ag guy. I own farms. I went back and I didn't inherit nothing. I'm the youngest of 9 kids from basically a sharecropper background. I went back and bought farms, and I live on a farm, and I had my hobby beef operation, and I love agriculture. But I'm going to be I'm like the person that tells you, hey, you know what? You're smoking too much weed. Hey, you know what? You're starting to believe your own. The old thing in show business, Monty, we used to say, don't get to where you start believing your own press clippings. That's an old thing from 30 years ago. And that's the tough part about ag. So I guess I just say, listen, man, I appreciate this industry as much as anybody, but you got to get off of this whole thing. And I said, let's just go to another route.
Let's take a quick break and hear from our national sales manager at ASN, Zach Neppel.
The AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. At ASN, we support farmers with top quality crop nutrition products and soil health practices. Our Power to Grow system delivers tailored nutrition to boost plant health and improve soil function. ensuring higher yields and sustainable growth. From seed to harvest, trust ASN to feed your crops and your bottom line. Let's farm better together. Visit agsolutionsnetwork.com to learn more.
No, do you think though that this thank a farmer and we feed the world, this mantra that's been ingrained into us over several years, if not decades, do you think that leads to this inertia that we have, or resistance to change, to do things differently, to adopt new practices, try new crops, go to market strategies, whatever? Do you think that's inadvertently or purposefully painting us into keep doing what you're doing because it supports the system we've built?
You summed it up as well as anybody could sum it up. Because you keep telling yourself this and you surround yourself with people who are of a similar mindset, it could take anybody. Take 3 cops that get told at the support the blue and you're keeping our streets safe. You keep, if those 3 just keep staying in the same little crucible.
At least they got a legit reason. They're getting shot at. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank emergency responders. Okay. I'm good with that. They're going into burning buildings and saving lives and getting shot at. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have that as a farmer.
It's like I said, it's not bad to have pridefulness about our industry. It's not bad to be, supportive of what we do. That's all fantastic. Like I said, but to your point, it creates or perpetuates is probably the better word, this thing of what I'm doing is right. And if you question it, but more importantly, I don't know that we get that question. I mean, all my joking about agriculture because starvation sucks, we tend to believe that the consumer hates us, and that's not necessarily true. If the consumer says things like, I think RFK is right, I don't want petroleum-based dye in my kids' cereal. Well, is that bad? And then if that same consumer says, I heard that they're spraying a bunch of herbicide on my food, I don't know if that's a good thing. You could understand why they would ask that question. So I think if we pull back a little bit and realize that some of the consumers' sentiment that we hear, it's not unvalidated, and generally, I don't think that I don't think that we think like the consumer. I mean, as I said, if you realize you're in a consumer business, hey, by the way, one of the other things is farm people are cheap. Agriculture people are cheap. And that is another thing that I would encourage anybody that works in this industry to pull back a little bit and say, we've got a commodity mindset and we assume that all of our customers do too. Well, Whole Foods would not exist if it was all about being the cheapest. So we should probably always understand when we say things like, it's all about being cheapest. No, it's not. You think it is because that's how you think, but that's not the entire consumer base. I mean, and what's really interesting, as much as ag people believe that everything comes down to the lowest price, more than half of the farm machinery in this country is painted green and yellow, and that sure as hell has never been sold as the cheapest piece of farm equipment you can buy, right?
Oh, but that's different. Well, that's a great point. And you can go into an Aldi's and you can pay $6 a pound for grass-fed organic beef. You can go into Whole Foods, and it's $12, and likely sourced from the same place. And so, the farmer still did it on the cheap, but someone in between made the difference. So
speaking of in between, right? That's another thing, Monty, that I've had to put out there for our ag people. And again, it sounds like you're being critical, but what you're doing is pointing out things. If you are only around your 4 farmer buddies and every discussion comes up to being something along the lines of, we work hard and feed the world and all that kind of thing. This thing about the farmer's share, and I've put this out there in my writing and in my videos. All right, I'm just going to stand out here. I've got a 2-year-old Ford F-150. My dad's rolling in his grave, I'm sure, because I paid like $66,000 for the damn thing or something. And it's got a sunroof and heated seats and all this kind of thing. So just imagine I go out there and I hold up, I take a pound of iron ore and I stand there and I say, this pound of iron ore is only worth $1.70. I don't have any idea what it would be worth, but let's just say that. And here, this truck cost me $67,000. So you know what? Why am I, as an iron ore producer, not getting my fair share? That's what farmers do when they perpetuate this thing of a farmer only gets 14 cents out of every food dollar. That's like holding a pound of iron ore, or a ton of iron ore for that matter, next to your Ford F-150. Point, there are millions of steps, or at least a dozen steps, between the iron ore and the Ford F-150. Just like there are a whole bunch of value-added processes that happen between your bushel of soybeans and the food at the Kroger store.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well,
the processing, the manufacturing, the packaging.
Right. You got to make it into steel. You got to bend it. You got to cut it. You got to assemble it. And yeah. And then you have to create the whole story behind it. You know, I like to say, imagine the iPhone. If Steve Jobs would have invented the iPhone and just expected somebody to just magically buy it and never did the presentation that he did. Yeah. You know, just like, okay, I've got it. Hope someone comes, or I'm just going to deliver it to the store and expect a check. You know, that's where we're at as farmers. We don't market our products from the standpoint of building a brand and a story behind them. We confuse pricing with marketing. Those are two different things. And you know, true. Anything that you're thinking about marketing your crops, no, you're not. You're pricing your crops. You're just setting a price. You're not building value in there.
That's so. By the way, on that very front, there are direct to consumer business models, you know, in production agriculture, and a lot of those people realize there's a whole bunch of work that goes into that. The promotion, the packaging. Just use the P words: processing, packaging, promotion. You know, all that kind of thing, placement, etc. And the truth is, you know, they do this thing. Well, the middleman's making all the money. Like, well, first off, the middleman is generally a whole bunch of steps, right? The place where you drop your grain doesn't then take it from there to putting it on a shelf at Kroger. You know, there's a whole bunch of stuff. It goes to this place, it goes to this place, it goes to this place. But, you know, if you're convinced that the middleman's making all the money, you could obviously become the middleman. And that takes a lot of work and a lot of moving parts. It's easier on meat than it is on some things, obviously, because you can, you know, process the meat and do that. Mm-hmm. But here's the big one. I don't know the exact numbers, but let's take Cargill, global company in meat and in grain, and various other things. The last numbers my friend Todd used to work for them. I think they like $105 billion annual revenue, and their actual net profit was like $5 billion. So
that's inflation, you know.
Yeah, I mean, so you're making like 5% margin, mm-hmm. And so I guess I would ask the question: if you're convinced that somehow the middleman's making all the money, 5%. 4% margins on the middle. And this is a big one that I've had to throw out there to some of my ag people. We keep hearing, oh, the big companies are going to take over ag. I'm like, I don't know that is going to happen as much as you might think, because most money people would not ever accept the kind of margins that we make. They're that small. You know what I'm saying? My buddy, the investor who sold his company and, you know, works as an investor now, I asked him once if he wanted to partner with me on buying something in agriculture. And when he found out what the return was, like, why the hell does anybody do this? so, you know, investors wouldn't accept the type of returns that we get and in general. So I think that's something that really needs to be pointed out. If you're convinced the middle people are making all the money, they are making money. I got all that. I mean, I get it. But input providers, you know, the companies that make the stuff that we use, what are their margins? They're publicly traded companies. You can look it up. You can find out what Bayer makes or BASF or any of them. And I don't. It's not anything that's. It's not NVIDIA. How's that?
And at the end of the day, why are we complaining about things we can't control? So let's look at some things we can control, right? So, you know, I bumped into you here recently at Jason Mock's Field Day. He's got a special name for it. I forget what it is, but and the host of the Augusta International Golf event there afterwards. But we were looking at his relay cropping and those kind of things. You got to talk to a lot of people there. You got to see it for yourself. Where do you see those kind of things going with the new practices, and where he's greatly reducing inputs, actually increasing outputs? It's more, economically, environmentally sustainable or regenerative. What's your thoughts on some of those crazy things that he's doing and others are doing in this space?
Well, he's beyond being an early adopter. It teach you, in business, you've got the early adopters, and then the pioneers, the early adopters, the middle of the road, and then the late. He's beyond that. He's absolutely a pioneer in this regard. You show up at his thing, and he has a shirt on that says "Farm Weird." He's almost evangelical about what he's doing, and he gets criticized. But you know what? He's not trying to sell you anything. He's not profiting off of telling you how he's doing stuff, other than if you want to come to his conference, his field day, which he's quite generous. So to the person listening to this or watching this that doesn't know what we're talking about, Jason Mock is about 50 miles south of my farm in northern Indiana. I guess you'd call his more east central Indiana, but he's doing relay cropping, which is essentially two crops in the same field at the same time, maybe wheat and soy, and driving over the soybeans to harvest the wheat. I mean, it's just some crazy stuff. And it's not monocropping, which we know that monocropping has some, the bee people don't like monocropping. Soil. Gabe Brown, in his book, Dirt to Soil, talks a lot about using cover crops, but not just mono cover crop, using like 4 different things and the benefits, it becomes exponential. That's what Jason Mock is doing. And he's experimenting. He's passionate about it. He is willing to share all of his ideas. He's doing it because he wants to prove that you can do things differently and actually make it make sense and make money, and then also do right by the environment. Like you said, he's using less inputs. He's using less synthetics, and he's not sacrificing yield. Will this idea catch on? There's a lot of, this is not just ag, let's face it. Most people don't like change, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're in agriculture or not. So you're not bashing on any particular industry, but no, most people won't adopt this yet. When some adoption happens because it makes money or it saves time and is more convenient, right? We didn't start using Roundup Ready soybeans because, of any reason other than it was easier, right? Instead of plowing, disking, planting, running the cultivator through the rows a few times, walking the beans. You and I are both old enough to remember walking bean fields. And then all of a sudden it's, just no-till, drill them, and then go out there and spray them with a Roundup once, maybe twice. I'm like, oh my God, that made things easier. So Jason's thing is not necessarily easier, but you can see some environmental benefit to this relay cropping. I suspect there will be others that do this. There are certainly not hardly any now, but it'll catch on. It makes you wonder. Here's where I think where it might get more broadacre, doing stuff like this. If we get the scrutiny that becomes regulation on synthetics and on chemistry amounts and on synthetic fertility, it's going to, and I do believe that's coming, and I believe it'll be coming almost in the way of, it'll be packaged as environmental, and it'll have the effect of lowering output, which actually will then sort of do some supply management, which is, dare I say, I'm not necessarily calling for it, but it wouldn't hurt things right now given these commodity prices. That's where I could see some more adoption of what Jason is doing, because his methods have allowed him to do it with less inputs. So I could see that being the impetus for this, because of a regulatory situation where they say, all right, Monty, we think it's great. You've got these prairie soils in Illinois. But you know what? You've been over applying nitrogen and phosphorus in particular. You're going to cut back by 40%. What? Yeah, you're going to cut back by 40%, and you're not going to be eligible for government crop insurance. If you don't, you're not going to be eligible for any of the USDA programs if you don't. Oh, crap. Well, I'm going to lose yield. No, you won't if you change your cropping system. That's where I think the adoption for stuff like Jason Mock's relay cropping gets some more inertia.
So is that where it's going to take to really? You had some keywords in there. We've done everything because it's easier and it's less work. And then when you look at Jason's and I relay crop too, it's twice as much work, right? It's 2 crops per acre per year in the field. So you're essentially, increasing your farming acreage by a third. How do we get over that mindset, or is there going to be technology that comes along that allows us to, with automation, where we can send the tractor or the combine out there to harvest the wheat inside the beans? How do we change that mindset? Because there's some huge compelling numbers he has in regards to the economics of that 80 bushel bean, 80 bushel wheat crop in 1 year compared to even the best corn crop that you could ask for. So it's not look at the economics. Okay, even if you don't believe him, divide by 2, and it's still better than what we're doing. What does it take to overcome these changes in that mindset shift? Is it going to be just regulations that does it? Because I hate that I have a libertarian bend to it, and my one proposal I put on Twitter there is like just makes me itch. But is that what it's going to take?
Well, I'm not certainly in love with the idea either. You and I could out libertarian one another probably. I spoke to the Libertarian National Convention once.
As Bill Clinton, did you get booed?
No. So, here's the thing. Nobody wants regulation. I believe it's coming, and I'll tell you why. I've been predicting this. About last year, I started doing some research. I got booked to speak at a function in Scottsbluff, Gehring, Nebraska, and it was all about the ag situation. And you had everything from extension to the retailers and the farmers there. They were under a bit of scrutiny, which is going to increase in ferocity, if you will. The sampling of wells found, oh my goodness, let's say more than half of them had above EPA acceptable levels of nitrates. Now we can dicker over EPA's numbers are probably, something we shouldn't live by. But the point is, let's just take a bigger picture here. There's no factories in Gehring, Nebraska. There are no big population centers where their sewage is going into the water. What one thing?
It's the people fertilizing their yard, Damian. Don't you know that?
That would be the case.
People in town fertilizing their yards.
That might be the case in Chesapeake Bay. Truly, it could be, because there's a lot of density of residents. But in Gehring, Nebraska, there's one source of this nitrate, and that would be agriculture. So I was booked to speak there to go into this whole thing about where I see things going and the scrutiny they're going to face. I think Nebraska holds the record for the biggest percentage of its land being devoted to agriculture. You're talking about a very ag state. Although the people that live there complain a lot about the tax rates, and I would too. Nebraska, Wisconsin, they're talking about nitrates in the water where all those dairy, where the concentrations of dairy are, meaning not the North Woods part of Wisconsin. If you've got, and in Iowa, there's a big movement now about the nitrates that are in the Fox River. I think it's Raccoon River. I think Raccoon River flows through Des Moines. So you're talking about, this is not happening in New York. This is happening in ag states. So if you think that regulation is not coming, I believe that you're kind of whistling past the graveyard, so to speak, because it's coming, and I think it's going to come fast. And I'm not sure that you and I don't want it. Again, look at the voter and look at the numbers. And if you say, you know what, I live in Iowa and I love Iowa and I am a voter and I'm not anti-agriculture, but by God, they're putting on so many pounds of synthetic nitrogen out here in this field, and it's ending up in my river. My kid can't go in there and catch fish because you can understand their concern. Regulation is absolutely coming. What's the number? Like 35% of applied nitrogen actually gets in the plant. That means 2/3 of it's going into the watershed. I think regulation's coming, Monty.
And we had Dr. Mulvaney on the podcast talking about that, and you're exactly right. It's 35%. So now, okay, Purdue graduate here. Did they teach you this, or did you read it in your Tri-States book? How many pounds of nitrogen does it take to make a bushel of corn? We're going to put you on the spot right now.
Isn't it 1.2 pounds is what the universities say?
Yeah, it depends, and it's 1.1 if you go further west. But yeah, they'll figure it out. Let's just for easy math, let's just say 1, okay?
Yeah.
Because I can divide by 1. Are you? The universities and all of them went together and they developed this protocol called the maximum return to nitrogen, or some call it economic optimum nitrogen rate. Okay, so what they say is, how much nitrogen should I put on to where the dollars I spend on nitrogen equal the dollars I gain on corn? Okay, so let's say for can I do easy math again,
Sure.
and also hopeful? Let's say corn would be $5 a bushel.
Okay, that's hopeful. That's hopeful.
Good days. Okay, we could use 4. Okay,
Sure.
but let's use 5 for easy math, and let's say also in the good days, nitrogen is 50 cents a pound, right? So what they say is hey, we can put on 10 pounds of nitrogen up to buy that last bushel.
Yep.
But wait a minute, you just told me that it takes 1.1, 1.2 to make a bushel of corn, and yet the university's telling us it's okay to put on 10 units of nitrogen at the very end to make the last bushel of corn. That is a 10x, or fact, take today's numbers, $4.60. It'd be 7 units to get the last one. That is a 7 times greater than what the plant's using it, and we wonder why why only 35% utilized. Why is there this disconnect out there, and how does that change? You think it's just going to come down from high and say, "Oh, you get X number of units, and that's it"?
So what I again, neither you nor I want regulation, but again, this is what I think that guys like you and I bring to our audience, is that I'm out on airplanes and I'm at conferences and I am at these conventions and I'm hearing from other folks, and I've got a pretty good network of people in ag, and I read a lot, to see different stuff. And so I use those examples using 3 agricultural states where the table's being pounded. Okay, the table's being pounded by either. It's not activists. I mean, that's the thing. It's not like I'm speaking in Gering, Nebraska. It ain't like there's a bunch of environmental, beatniks hanging outside the hotel protesting. It's not like that. It's coming from just residents, or maybe somebody like in Iowa, there was happened to be he's a physician that's also like an elected state representative. It's happening that way. So let's say the regulation comes through, and it's where EPA and USDA do this. And I don't like that, because that was kind of like waters of the United States. But let's just say it's EPA via USDA. They say for you to be eligible for any USDA programs, you're going to decrease your nitrogen by half. Farmers will scream bloody murder and say, oh my God, you're going to put us out of business. And here's the thing. I was old enough. You and I are both old enough to remember. They said, you're going to take tetracycline out of the water in the chicken barns, because we used a tetracycline antibiotic so much because it helped the birds obviously not have disease when they're in these confinement units, and it helped them convert feed to meat in a more efficient manner. So you have less death loss, less sickness, and bigger rate of gain. But you know what? We're also creating all kinds of germs that are antibiotic resistant. Take the tetracycline out of the drips into water. Oh my God, chicken's going to go to $27 a pound. All of our flocks are going to die. And guess what happened? You already know what happened, don't you, Monty? Nothing. It took a month or 2 or a year for the poultry producers and egg producers to just get right by it, and then realized, yeah, you know what? We were just fine without the tetracycline. It was about 15 years ago. I spoke at a big pork event. I've done a lot of different speaking at pork events. And it was when big announcements were made. Hey, you know what? You're not going to be able to use antibiotics in these hog barns as just preventive. It's going to be prescriptive. And you're going to have to be much more judicious. And I heard the same thing. Oh my God, our pigs are going to die. Their rate of gain. And guess what? We've cut the amount of antibiotic usage in the hog herd in this country by like 2/3. And obviously there's no shortage of pork right now. we'll go through the same thing with applied nitrogen using the tetracycline or the antibiotics in the swine. Oh my God, we're going to only get 60 bushel corn out here in Illinois instead of 250. And it'll take about one season at most to make the adjustment. And then the producers will say, boy, remember back when we used to put on 1.2, 1.1 pounds of nitrogen per wow. It turns out we only need about one half of that.
I think one of the things that I like to say is that it's a matter of framing it. Okay, so back to We Feed the World or Thank a Farmer and all these kind of things. We frame it as, what do we call nitrogen that isn't used by the plant? What's the 4-letter word we call that?
The 4-letter word we call what?
Nitrogen loss.
Oh, yeah.
So let's say we put on 150 units and we get a rain event and we lost the nitrogen, right? Where'd it go? Does anybody go looking for it? But the reality is it's not loss. Our loss, as a libertarian, you can do anything you want with your land, your property, as long as it doesn't affect someone else. And what we're doing currently is affecting others, whether it's downstream, in the air, in the groundwater. However we're doing it, it's having an effect on others. And I think we have to really I call it nitrogen. It's nitrogen pollution. It's not.
Yeah. So that's the tough part is, and again, you and I, we're farm people, we're ag people. We love the people that are in ag. We work in this industry. We're not criticizing. We are pointing out some reality. And that's why, again, regulation is coming. And right now, these people that out here in the suburbs I live in Phoenix, probably don't have it on their radar. They probably don't have this whole thing about, 2/3 of applied nitrogen is getting into the watershed in my home state of Indiana. But by golly, the people in Indiana are starting to understand it. And the people in Iowa are starting to understand it, and in Nebraska and Wisconsin and et cetera. So it's going to happen. It's going to end up being a win economically and environmentally. So many things that we have done have been economic and environmental wins, that the tough part then is it just means, and someone's saying, what's the economic win, Damian? My yield's going to go down. I don't think that it will. I think that we're going to just, guys like Monte are going to say, I've already been decreasing my nitrogen. Here's the one bad part. What if you're already doing it right? Let's say over there at Bottens Farms in Illinois, you're saying, I'm not doing 1.1 pound of applied nitrogen. I'm doing, 0.6, 0.7. You're already making the reduction. What if they say you have to reduce it from where you are? If it's just, here's what you're allowed, that's okay, because you're already, but if they say, it's kind of like CRP. If you had 33 acres back over here that was next to a river and curvy and highly erodible, if you were responsible, you put it in oats and then alfalfa and pasture. Mm-hmm. If you were irresponsible, you moldboard plowed it, let it wash into the river, and then along comes CRP and says, hey, you should stick that in the CRP program. Well, I'd like to put it in CRP. Well, no, you can't, because you've got it in oats and pasture. You only can put it in CRP if it's been tilled. I'm like, well, I didn't till it because it would have been irresponsible. That's what I hope we don't get with the nitrogen thing, where you punish those that have already done the reduction.
Yeah, additionality is a problem. I understand it, from the greenhouse credit arena, where they're saying, hey, we want to do more than what we're already doing, versus the pay, the original intent of CSP was to pay producers for good behavior, where EQIP was typically to fund not doing bad behavior, right? So you kind of had the two approaches there. But if you're already doing certain things, that it's more often than not, and you're exactly right, we are at 0.6, and that does happen. So,
well, it's just, that's where you hope that then there's not some silly, because the government screws a lot of stuff up, as you and I both know. They say, so you're going to reduce it from where you already are. Then are you in a situation where you have to lie and say, oh yeah, I was using 1.1 to be eligible? And then, or, like I said, there's folks that took crappy ground out of an oats alfalfa rotation, put it in corn for a couple of years to be eligible then to put it in CRP, because it had to have been in a row crop for 2 of the last 5 years, I think was the term.
If you look at the carbon programs, there's a lot of incentive to go out and disc it or chisel it 1 year and go back to no-till to qualify for higher payments. All right. So always doing the right thing, right? What other things you see, nitrogen's high on people's minds, pesticides, obviously glyphosate gets the biggest bony finger, but pretty much you can find a study somewhere on almost any herbicide. You probably shouldn't drink it or take a bath in it or things like that. What are other things that farmers that you see that farmers just may not be aware of in trends out there in the marketplace?
Well, I shot a very positive video because my guy that produces my show said, you've got a lot of stuff that's a little bit dour. And I said, well, that's kind of where we are right now. Meat and protein. This is a real bright spot. And it's not like this is news to anyone that is in ag, because they're seeing this and saying, beef in particular, because the prices are high. But I don't know that it's going to be that we're going to make $1 bazillion out of it, but I see this as a long-term trend. Let's just look at kind of how these dots connect. The consumer was already moving into protein. And then if you go to the grocery, I like to go to the grocery because I'm always looking again at the marketplace and what remembering that we produce stuff that goes on those shelves. Ideally, we're supposed to. You can't buy cornflakes that tout how much protein is in the box. I think toothpaste probably touts how much protein bars, all this packaged food and processed food, which is generally crap. And RFK's got a big point there, is touting how much protein it has. Animal protein is a very bright spot. I looked at the numbers. We're going to eat about 58 pounds of beef, I think, this year, which is right where we were the last couple of years. Beef prices are almost double what they were 5 or 10 years ago, and we've kept the exact same consumption. That is proving that beef doesn't have the elasticity of demand that they maybe told us it did back in AgEcon 201. Chicken, we've surpassed 100 pounds of chicken consumption per American per year. We're staying right about 50 pounds of pork consumption. So we're like all in. And if you factor in seafood, around 15 to 16 pounds of seafood consumed per American per year, 15 to 16 pounds of turkey, you're pushing like 240 pounds of animal protein if you count the seafood. That's a bright spot because it uses a bunch of grain to make it, right? That's the argument that the vegan crowd and the environmental crowd thinks that beef is bad because it takes 8 pounds of grain to make a pound of beef. But it's good for the crops, but also it's good for the consumer that all this messaging from the vegans, the environmental wackos that really are just being used by, Bill Gateses of the world to tell you that you need to switch to fake meat because he is an investor. And all of that noise that it's inhumane, consumer didn't care because it's not true. That it's bad for the environment, consumer doesn't care because they generally don't believe it to be true. That it's bad for your health, absolutely being proven to be false. What's bad for your health? All those carbohydrates we told you to eat. And it made you all that carbohydrate gets converted to sugar. All of a sudden you got obesity, you got diabetes. So protein is a real bright spot. And I don't see it going. I did a recording of my Business of Ag show with an economist from Rabobank, and we both struggled to find where this would somehow turn the other way. So I think that's a bright spot that everybody in ag should think about. And it's right there with fat.
And think of the opportunities that creates for us, Damian, because how much ground did we take out, marginal ground did we take out of production and farm it no-till, up and down hills that probably should still be pasture ground. But we have, kids coming back from college and need an opportunity. There, how many farmers had 50 head of beef cows at one time because there was ground that just wasn't that great for farming, and we need more calves. You look at the latest on feed report; it's abysmal. We need more animals to feed. I'm not saying we need to go back to small feedlots in the Midwest because there's some serious economic advantages out west to the feedlot. But there's no reason why the calves can't be born here on grass. I mean, that's and it provides diversity and especially now with technology of virtual fencing and such, it's far more manageable than what it used to be.
If I lived full time at my farm, I would still have cows. I had them for 13 years, and
you're recovering dairyman.
Yeah. So I've got a facility that needs a little updating. It would have them. And to your point, when I was a kid, every granted, there were a bunch more mid-sized to smaller farms, and about everybody, fed some hogs and had that, like you said, that 21 acres back there that was kind of rough and hilly and all that. It had cows on it. Almost everybody had some cows. That culture still exists, I think, in Iowa. I don't. It doesn't happen around me in Northeast Indiana. You can about count the number of folks that still keep cows. But yeah, meat. To your bigger point there, meat is a bright spot for agriculture. Another one I'm going to do a video production about is the fat thing. The whole fat farce that was begun in the 50s and caught steam in the 70s. When we were kids, it became this thing. And up until only about a decade or so ago, low fat, low fat, low fat. And I never bought into it. I never, bought low fat anything. God, you go to the store, they used to have low fat sour cream. Like, the purpose of sour cream is fat. And what are we doing here? And then Nina Teicholz came out with that book, Big Fat Surprise. And I had her on my show. She pointed out that much of that was just not based on science. It was all based on the 7 countries, the study of seven countries. That was all bogus. It was all bastardized science. So look at where the win is there. We just got it now. It looks like whole milk is going to be back in the school lunch program. And I got to tell you, I think the dairy industry itself, and I'm not talking about the producers, I'm talking about the processors. I think they were secretly happy when Michelle Obama pushed this whole has to be skim milk into schools, because they said, oh, well, great. We'll just continue to take the fat off of the skim milk and then use that for butter and higher margin products. But this is how short-sighted. This is the bad part about ag sometimes. Very short-sighted, because, again, you are not your consumer. I ain't going to drink no skim milk, but you know what? The school kids sure can, and we'll make more money. Yeah, you know what you also just did? You created an entire generation who hates your product, because when they had it, it was just shit. It was white water in a carton, and they will never be a consumer of your product ever again. But you thought about it in the short term and said, yeah, well, great. We can just extract the fat out of that and turn it into butter and make more money. So I think that the fat thing is another positive for agriculture, because it's probably a bigger thing when you think about even the RFK Jr. aspect of this, Monty. There is sort of a movement back to what you're eating isn't really food, all the processed junk. And again, the categories that then farmer does get a bigger share than 14 cents out of every food dollar is on the stuff that's nearer to the farm, meaning it doesn't go through 11 different processes and packagings and all this crap. So that's ultimately positive for the farm.
Yeah. In the milk industry, fluid drives the price, right? So if we're sending more fat out in fluid, then there's creating competition for that fat to make the other dairy products down the stream. So that's exciting.
I'm only a whole milk guy, by the way.
It shows. Look at him. Model health. Yeah, look at that. So anyway,
I hiked the top of the mountain today. I did 2 sets of pull-ups, my set of push-ups, and my stretches. And I don't know. I think the whole milk with this time of year, whole milk half, eggnog half, because you got to do the festive.
Got to celebrate, yes.
Yeah, right. And then the rest of the year, it's 2 tablespoons of Nestle Quick.
Well, when you're out there hiking, make sure you tell Bobby and Oz thank you for all they're doing, because I really think that creates an opportunity for the farmer to have these things, so it creates higher value products for us and encourages us to do better. Thoughts on the 12 or the 700 million for Regen Ag that's been recently announced? I noticed it kind of came out 2 days after the $12 billion appeasement jargon. It came out with this announcement for regenerative agriculture and farmer-led pilots. I'm friends with some of the folks at NRCS up there, and I'm pretty excited about it. I don't know what your thoughts are on it.
On the 700 million, I printed it off because I wanted to see if I was missing anything. I don't know what it's going to do. In other words, it just says to foster or support farmers in their movement to regenerative. Is it
long-term contract, 5 to 10 years?
Okay.
Verified outcomes. So farmer, you create the design, and then we do soil sampling ahead of time and after, and also other outcomes, and then pay based on the outcome.
Okay.
and holistic planning. So rather than just, I got a problem with a waterway, I've got a problem with a driveway, it's here's everything I need to accomplish it on a holistic plan. So and interagency. So in other words, they're getting Department of Defense involved to purchase the food through to feed our troops regenerative farming. So they're creating the markets for these higher value food
Okay,
things.
so that was where I could understand some of the programming, and then is it then you get so many dollars per acre that you sort of enroll?
Depends on what you're trying to do. So if you need XYZ to be able to accomplish your holistic plan, then there'll be a percentage of that in the share.
So that
Farmer driven.
Yeah, okay, that's cool, but
wild.
it's not, there's not one set program.
You'll go on the practices that they already have in place, but additional practices or combination of practices or cross program is encouraged.
I see. And this does not make one ineligible for anything else, right?
I wouldn't think so. I'd have to think about an example of that, Damian. But
yeah,
there's always devil in the details, right? But I think
Sure.
the intention of the holistic planning, farmer led, long term.
So I like
how
it.
farmers farm.
Yeah, I like it because you know, I had Gabe on my show, and I've met him at some events, and he's obviously was very upfront about this whole regenerative stuff. I read the book, and
I bought cows from him.
what we know is the aspects of regenerative where we use livestock. Obviously, it's like the old days. You know, it's like, okay, we spread manure and we have this, and closed loop system. Put the cows out on the corn stalks after the harvested, all that kind of thing. So to say that the program is it going to be a success? I don't know. Do we need some of these things? There's no question. I believe that we're going to look back someday at all the tillage that has happened in this industry and say this is like using leeches for medical treatment that they used to do a couple of years ago. I've had to hear it, from people. You don't even farm. What do you know? You don't going to tell me how to farm. I'm not telling you how to do anything. I agree with you, but when you look at sedimentation and some of our waterways, and when I'm in the curvy parts of Iowa a couple of years ago about late winter, early spring, and I see a ditch filled up with soil coming out of a field that had 23% slopes, and it washed it away. The guy that operates that blames the weather. Yeah, he's saying that the reason the field washed away is because of the weather. No, it's because of you. So I think that the move to regenerative is probably certain aspects of it are going to happen anyhow, because what I'm still torn on is farm ground in your part of the world, my part of the world, $13,000-$14,000. Why wouldn't you consider some of these practices that are soil enhancing when it's worth that, when that dirt is worth that much?
Right. At minimum, it's we've wasted $700 million probably on toilets for NASA. Throw something at the wall, see what sticks. Maybe they can get some traction. So it's I think you have a great point. I think we all need to spend a little more time in the grocery store, a little more time on social media, listening to what our customers want, and then thinking about how we can adapt accordingly. And when we do that, when we get closer to what our customers want, the chance for us to make higher margin and more profit is certainly there. So it's going to be a fun time ahead. I hope we get a chance to visit again and just kind of see how our crystal ball projections come out. See if maybe we'll be the Miss Chloe's of the ag world here. So
yeah, I got to tell you, I mean, it's difficult to remain optimistic in our industry right now. You and I are recording this in Christmas time of 2025, and I hope that things improve. There's a couple things that if you're historically minded, we've been here before. And it wasn't pretty. And I remember the 80s, and I Christmas of 1985, I got a Walls brand winter coat was my Christmas present, so I could go out and work. That's what Christmas looked like when I was a 16-year-old. So I've got an understanding of what depressed farm economics look like. There's no question. I lived it. What I do think is going to happen, to be honest. I almost think some of this regulation that we're talking about, if it happens, is going to serve to be almost then an attempt to reduce some supply. In other words, it might cause some idling of some acres or something. Now, the bad part is Brazil is going to expand for everything we contract. But, the other side of it is we just continue to produce, and then fight it out on the global market. There is the chance that we, using our economic position as the biggest economy in the world, do sort of heavy-handedly make countries, you want access to sell your crap to the United States, that's great. You're going to buy our stuff out of agriculture as the trade. Hasn't quite worked that way so far.
Yeah, we got maybe 3 years of that, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
After later. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time today, Damian. Thanks for sharing your story and bringing a little comedy and levity to agriculture, but unique insights that farmers need to hear. What's the best way? You got a couple books there you want to mention? And
the books have been a few years old. They're just a neat backstop. DamianMason.com. I'm very active on social. I do stuff on LinkedIn. I put out my videos. If you want to go to my YouTube channel, just go into YouTube and type in Damian Mason. I put out ag commentary videos, and I put out the Business of Agriculture show every week. And then I do my side work for Extreme Ag, producing their stuff, Cutting the Curve. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, everywhere. Business of Agriculture, DamianMason.com. I really appreciate you having me on here.
All right, Damian, thanks for your time today, and enjoy that oh so bitterly cold weather down there in Scottsdale or wherever you happen to be.
Sunny and beautiful. Thank you.
All right, take care. Thanks again.